I finally checked this one off my bucket list. I've been doing fantasy football since 2008. I've had every random Ravens wide receiver under the sun. I had Derek Mason and TJ Houshmandzadeh and Mark Clayton, all the way up until like Zay Flowers, and things finally got good. I am by no means an expert. I am simply a guy who enjoys talking about it here on the internet. But I have only ever done a snake draft before. It was just one of those things. It never happened for me to do an auction. All of my friends, all of my leagues I've always been in, they were all snake drafts. Auctions also really hard to organize because everybody needs to be there. They're also run very long, so it just never happened before. But the guys over at the FFU, the Fantasy Football Universe, they put together several very fun leagues to be in this season, and I decided I had to hop in to their auction league. So this is how my first ever auction league went. These are some of the things I kind of took away from it moving forward, and some things I think might just be of note for you if you're in an auction league moving forward. And again, I am by no means an expert on these auction leagues. This is the first time I was ever in one. So in the description down below, I do have a link to the FFU's video. They did a live stream during this draft. Go check it out. They had some really good pieces of advice in there throughout. So one of the first things I took note of here was it didn't go in order of the top players necessarily, which of course I knew that would be how an auction would work, but I wasn't totally sure how that would affect the values, right? So for example, the first quarterback being nominated, it wasn't everyone's QB1 Josh Allen or Lamar or Mahomes or even Jalen Hurts. It was CJ Stroud. Now we did have a bit of a hiccup with the clock here. He went for $34. I know I was getting ready to place another bid on him. I think he would have gone for about 40. And seeing how the rest of this draft went out, you can really tell that's kind of where his range of quarterbacks were going, was around $40. I went into this draft kind of hoping to spend about $80 on my quarterbacks because this is a super flex league. I really wanted to make sure I was strong at quarterback. One thing I thought was really interesting was we had a few teams that really kind of went hard after the quarterbacks because this is a super flex league. Those three teams were ones who went Josh Allen for $55 and then turned around and went Mahomes for $50. Aaron St. Dennis, who actually kind of ran the draft, he's the commissioner, he bought both Lamar and Jalen Hurts for $51 a piece. And then I thought I was kind of spending quite a bit of money because the second quarterback out there was Anthony Richardson, who I bought for $39. And then I also took a Joe Burrow at $32 a little bit later on. I think that turned out to be a really good value. I'm super happy with my quarterback prices there of both Anthony Richardson and Joe Burrow. So that's one thing. If you are in a super flex auction, just be ready to pay up for quarterbacks. I think $80 out of a $200 budget is kind of a really good target number to be at. If you go above that, I think you're really going to find yourself hurting in some other positions. You can look at those two teams there who did spend up on those quarterbacks to the extreme amount, and you can see that, that they're definitely not ideal, right? The one has Zach Charbonnet right now in a flex spot. Josh Palmer's on his bench. He'll probably plug into that spot. The other one, his wide receivers, Jacoby Myers, Khalil Shakir, Gabe Davis, and Courtland Sutton. Now, he did make a trade immediately after the draft, trading Justin Herbert off of his roster for George Pickens, but the point does still remain pretty weak there at wide receiver. And Zach Moss and Luke Musgrave, even in a tight end premium league, not quite the flexes you'd like to have, but definitely does have that advantage at quarterback. I went into this kind of with a bit of an idea, looking at my tiers and my rankings of a few things I really wanted to hit on. I definitely wanted to have 4 players I felt were kind of in that rounds 1 through 3 sort of range. And then I wanted to also hit the, in my rankings, you can see the red tier of wide receivers. I really wanted to have 2 guys from that be my 2 flexes. And I also wanted to be kind of extra strong at wide receiver on the bench a little bit because it is, a super flex league, but also is half PPR, but it's also half point for receiving first downs. So I really prioritize kind of getting those wide receivers as well. And so on the bench, I'm really happy with having Brian Thomas and Chris Godwin, as well as Curtis Samuel there to go there. I want to make sure I got a third quarterback, so Daniel Jones for $1 towards the very end. I'm in a draft right now. We're going to go ahead and mute that. So I was really happy to have Daniel Jones also be my QB3. I'm perfectly fine with that in a super flex league. Now, when you have strengths like that, when you really pay up at certain positions, I really paid up at wide receiver and quarterback, you are obviously going to have some weaknesses. So let's talk about those, because I think that's one thing to really keep an eye on with your auctions is having strengths and weaknesses. For me personally, I think running back is the place to be a little bit weaker. I do wish we had a couple more bench spots in this league because I would have really liked to have taken a couple more darts Add some extra handcuffs. Like I said, I really kind of wanted to prioritize those wide receivers that I could see being in my lineup, but that did mean that my running backs are pretty weak here. So Zamir White was actually a guy I was pretty darn happy with at $15. You can kind of see some other guys in that same range as him going for pretty similar dollar amounts, and those high-end running backs you can see on the screen went for just buku dollars. You had those Christian McCaffrey, Bijan, and Breece going for over 50s. You had those other RB1s going for, upper 20s, mid 20s. And then all of a sudden it really plummeted, where you had an Alvin Kamara and a Joe Mixon and Zamir White going for those teens. That I'm very happy to have grabbed one of those guys, because I think that it's kind of a zero RB build. And that's one thing I found really cool with the auction, is you kind of get to choose your own build. You're not really forced into it like you might be in a draft sometimes. Going into an auction, I think it's important to be flexible, but you do also get to really kind of execute your plan, knowing you really can't be sniped on players as much. Okay, so let's talk about where I really screwed up on this thing, though. So this is a half point per tight end reception bonus. So a bit of a tight end premium. And early on, I actually nominated Sam Laporta because I wanted to kind of set that benchmark and know for myself. I wanted to kind of learn that information. What are these high-end tight ends going to be going for? And he went for $21. So, okay, in my head, all right, Sam Laporta went for 21. That means I should probably be able to get Andrews for like 14, 15 was kind of my headspace there. Maybe an Evan Ingram for like 11 or 10 or 12, somewhere down in that range. If I need to, Pat Freiermuth for like $2, sure, whatever. Okay. So we're going through the auction, and Travis Kelce goes off the board for 25. You have Trey McBride, he goes for 18. So okay, I know a lot of people are really excited about Trey McBride. I personally prefer Mark Andrews. Andrews comes up, and we kind of go and go and go, and he ends up going for 20. And I didn't want to pay 21, which would match Laporta, because that's another thing I kind of learned here was, it's one of those things that's obvious that, like, it's obvious when you step back and think about it, but you don't think about it in the heat of the moment. If I bid 19 and someone else bids 20, well, I can't also bid 20. I can't just match him and win the player. I have to go $1 farther. So I didn't want to go 21 and match Laporta's value on Andrews. I wanted to save some of that money because, again, I really wanted to value those flex positions. So I ended up passing on Andrews. Okay, fine. In my head, hey, we still have Evan Ingram, we still have Njoku, we still have George Kittle, and Kittle ended up being the guy. In hindsight, I should have just spent the money. So Njoku ends up going for $6. I don't remember how exactly that happened, but I definitely should have been in on that as well. That's a screaming value off the page here. Jake Ferguson, he goes for $9. Okay, sure. Brock Bowers goes for $9 as well. We get to George Kittle. I put George Kittle to $9. The clock ticking down. I feel pretty good about it. Next thing you know, boom, boom, couple dollars go on the board. And now George Kittle's sitting there at 11. Now I'd have to pay $12 for George Kittle. I debated the heck out of it. I went down to the wire. I almost clicked the button. I didn't click the button because I looked at my rankings. I said, you know what? Dallas Goedert. I'll just spend a whole lot of money later on, and I'll get Dallas Goedert for $1. Well, then we get later on in the draft, and I've spent a whole lot of money elsewhere, and I put up Dallas Goedert for $1. Someone else bids $2. I bid $3. They bid $4. I can't match. Pretty much screwed at tight end now. I even put up Luke Musgrave for $1. Someone put down a 2 on him. I put up Cole Kmet for $1. Someone else put down 2. And at that point, I couldn't do anything about it. I was stuck. And so my starting tight end in a tight end premium league is going to be Isaiah Likely. I've already tried to kind of reach out for a couple of trades to upgrade a tight end to no avail. We'll see what happens. Look, I like Isaiah Likely. I think he's a really good player. I think that he has a high ceiling for sure. Week 1's going to be pretty painful, though. So we'll see how it goes early on in the season. It may be a situation where I need to downgrade from one of my quarterbacks and kind of take on a lesser QB2 in order to get a tight end of value. I think probably one of my wide receivers is the move to make, right? Trade away like either Keenan Allen or Chris Godwin and go get one of the go get one of the tight ends from there. But regardless, though, it was definitely where I screwed up, though. It was definitely my mistake of not doing George Kittle or David Njoku. Njoku is also the big one, for sure. So what are some lessons that I may have learned from my first auction experience? Well, I think Number one is always nominate players you do not want to draft, right? I think outside of $1 players, when you get later on, everybody's out of money, then go ahead and nominate the guys you want to take. I think the move early on is to nominate those players who go for a lot of money that you don't want. I saw what Christian McCaffrey went for. I saw what Breece Hall went for. So I knew without a doubt I was nominating Bijan Robinson the first time I had the chance, because I wanted to flush out a lot of money, right? You really want to kind of get other teams kind of bankrupt a little bit. So you can kind of bully around those middle round players a little bit and really kind of collect the guys you want to take in those ranges. I think the second lesson I learned in this auction was be patient, and it's so hard because you have the ability to take every single player early on, right? There's not a single player whose name pops up in the early portion that you don't say, well, I kind of want that player to be on my fantasy football team. That's why these guys are being drafted early on in snake drafts. In auctions, though, you have to remember those values are going to plummet quicker. So you can really have a chance to bully some teams around, take multiple guys later on for the value of just that one. In hindsight, Davante Adams at $25, yeah, it's a good value. It was right there with other guys in my rankings. If you look at those, you got Puka Nacua, you've got Garrett Wilson, you've got Marvin Harrison, Chris Olave. They're kind of all right there in that range that I have Davante Adams in, and his dollar amount went right there in that range with those guys. But I think in hindsight, I would have been better off maybe not taking Davante Adams, but taking DJ Moore and George Kittle, right? Or a Mike Evans and a Brock Bowers, something like that. So you need to kind of come away with a few players who are those high-end players. I personally was targeting getting 4. Maybe I should have gone for more of 3 of those players and taking that Davante Adams slot and kind of taking that money and split it into 2 more players. To go along with being patient, I think it's also important to tier your rankings. Have those tiers set up and be patient within those tiers. That red tier of wide receivers for me, those guys going all the way from 18 to 37 for me. I think it's really kind of a jumbled up mess there. And you can see there are a lot of values in that range compared to other guys. Now, I will note, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, those both happened after everybody already spent their money, myself included. I already gotten Godwin and Evans and Higgins at that point. But my point being here, though, I would much rather maybe pass on a DJ Moore for 15 in order to take a T. Higgins for 12. Those $3 may not look like much, but when you were working with $200 and you are already allocating about 80 of it to quarterback, you need to understand every single dollar really does count. And those later on picks, it really does come down to a dollar or two. I would have Luke Musgrave on my team right now if I had just a couple extra dollars in my pocket from earlier in the draft. So those are kind of the lessons I learned, I think, from my first ever auction. Have you ever done an auction draft before? Put your experience in the comments down below. I would love to learn something from you guys on this one because I loved it. I had an absolute blast. It went on for like 3 hours, which, hey, you know what? If anything's going to go on for that long for me, it might as well be a fantasy football draft. It was a great time the entire way through. Put your comments down below on those auction drafts. And hey, if you were looking for any other strategies on anything, go ahead and check out the videos on your screen right now and check out some more of my fantasy football content right here on the channel.